as we draw closer to the penultimate confrontation between the Emperor and Horus in the End in the Death Volume 2, there are a few theories regarding how exactly it'll play out. I, for my part, have my own theory.
Be you angels? And we said nay. We are but men. Rock.
One long-standing event in the lore of Warhammer is the story of the alleged lone guardsman who stood between the wounded Emperor and Horus and was subsequently struck down for his bravery, thereby motivating the Emperor to finally destroy Horus after seeing what he had become because of how brutally he killed this guardsman who was just doing his duty. In fact, in the Imperial Guard, the Order of Saint Ollanius Pius is the highest award to a standard soldier for bravery and valor. Great story, cut and dry, makes sense, and it's beloved by many people because it shows just how great the human spirit is and how badass one lone guardsman can be. But it's not exactly clear how that will play out or if that thing is canon anymore at all. If it does happen where one person stands between Horus and the Emperor, which personally I believe it will happen, there are a few candidates for who that person will be, and none of them are actually baseline humans. So I'm gonna go over those people in this video and let you guys decide who you think the one to take the bullet is gonna be. It all really started to get called into question in the book Know No Fear, the 19th novel in the Horus Heresy series, one written by Dan Abnett back in 2012. Therein, we meet none other than Ollanius Pius, and he isn't just some random guardsman. We find out that he is actually one of the Perpetuals, mutants known as Homo Superior, who are effectively immortal, and in some instances can't die at all. He is actually older than the Emperor of Mankind himself, having been born around 15,000 BC in the city of Nineveh, as opposed to the Emperor, who was born around 8,000 BC. Now, it should be known, his name isn't exactly Ollanius Pius, it's Ollanius Persson, or at least that's the name he's currently using is. Through his long life, he's used many names and had many identities, one identity being War Master. You see, he and the Emperor used to be friends and did fight alongside each other back when the Emperor was more of a petty ruler of Terra against what is effectively like the Proto-Cognitae. For those who don't know what the Cognitae is, it's a shadowy order of heretics with very deep connections and mysterious motives. They're considered like the heretical Shadow Inquisition, but now people aren't entirely sure if they're truly heretical. It's complicated. But what we do know for sure about them is that back in this ancient time, when men fought with shields and swords, they had a tower, and in this tower was a near-perfect lexicon of the language known as Enuncia. Now, what Enuncia is a language of creation and destruction. You speak the language, and the words themselves reverberate through the fabric of reality, weaving effects in and out of existence. Things can be created, things can be destroyed, and as you can imagine, it's very, very dangerous. Even just using it, not even the power itself, but using it takes a huge toll. Whenever a mortal person speaks a word of Enuncia, they'll often end up spitting out blood and broken teeth, or could burn their lips off. It is painful and difficult, and that's why the Eldar know about it but never ever use it. In fact, it's even theorized to have been the language of the Old Ones because of this reality warping effect, and the fact that mortals cannot properly contain it. Now, they actually managed to compile a full tower with almost all of Enuncia in it, and the Emperor and Ollanius Persson both recognized the threat this posed to humanity's continued existence. So they went to war, the Emperor as the leader and Ollanius as his war master, to destroy the armies of the Cognitae and bring the tower down. And they did. They beat the Cognitae's armies and stormed the tower. But when they got there, the Emperor started saying to Ollanius, "You know, I was never fully on board with destroying this thing. We should take control of it. We can use it. We can steer humanity. We can do it right." But Ollanius was completely against this idea, and actually stabbed the Emperor and then spoke a word of Enuncia on the wall, which brought down lightning and destroyed the tower. Yeah, heads up, this was the biblical Tower of Babel. And a funny thing, on the tarot card, the Tower, you see the Tower of Babel being destroyed and two figures falling from it. It turns out those two figures were the Emperor and Ollanius Persson. After this, Ollanius went to ground and lived the life of normal human soldiers throughout history. He lived through the Dark Age of technology, the heights of humanity, even the cybernetic revolt, and eventually joined up with the Great Crusade and fought in the Emperor's armies, in secret of course, and eventually retired to the planet of Calth to live the quiet life he always wanted, with a wife and his own little farm and a community, as well as his faith. Because a funny thing about him that I find interesting is that he's Catholic. So despite the fact that he lived 15,000 years before the rise of Christianity, he has remained fervently Catholic for 30,000 years. I've seen people actually say, oh, he just holds on to Catholicism because it's a relic of old Earth before the rise of the Emperor, it's an ancient piece of human culture, it's just a thing he does. And I'll admit, I'm actually kind of Hindu in a similar way. It's just kind of a part of me and a tradition of sorts. I'm not really a very theological person, but no, he is fervently Catholic. Like, when he's in mortal danger during the betrayal at Calth, when the whole planet's going up in flames, he starts praying. He clutches his crucifix while caught in a landslide and says, "Oh my God, please save me, deliver me through this." He starts praying for deliverance. And even more interestingly, he faces Horus and starts praying. Now, he doesn't literally face Horus, not quite yet, but he is shown a vision by John Grammaticus, who up until this point has never exhibited the power to do something like this, especially from across the galaxy, but whatever, wherein he is standing aboard the Vengeful Spirit and, unbeknownst to him, is in front of the wounded Emperor, facing Horus. And when he sees Horus and understandably mistakes him for Satan, he immediately grabs the crucifix around his neck and says, "I renounce you, evil one," and then realizes he's holding a lasgun. So that's it, right? It's pretty cut and dry. We see a vision of it happening, he's got the name, and even some interesting backstory about how he's the Emperor's old friend, finally reconciling with him, and everything comes full circle. It all ties up really nicely. Well, not exactly. You see, after the Battle of Calth, Ollanius would flee with a group of survivors who honestly I might as well refer to as Huey, Dewey, and Louie, or Curly, Ed, and fucking Moe at some point, because you don't care and neither do I. And they're not really relevant to the story. They would eventually make their way to Terra during the siege and link up with John Grammaticus, their mission being to get to the Emperor and warn him about vaguely something. It's implied they're gonna warn him to not go confront Horus, or just provide him with some vital information. Honestly, it's vague and not super relevant, but what is relevant is the fact that they fail. Through all their trials and tribulations, they fail. They get to the throne room and meet Vulcan, and see a glowing figure on the throne, only to be informed that's Malkador. The Emperor has already left to meet Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Now, I don't believe for a second this is the end of their story. We're gonna find out what happens to them in The End in the Death Volume 2, but I'm not entirely sure they will make it aboard the ship itself. They might have some contrived way of getting aboard, but again, it's just been called into question if Ollanius Pius, as he is known because he is so Catholic, will be there to save the Emperor from Horus. But somebody is aboard the Vengeful Spirit. None other than Garviel Loken, the last Luna Wolf. By around the end of the Great Crusade, Garviel Loken had ascended to the highest ranks of the Luna Wolves, the Mournival, which was Horus Lupercal's personal advisory body of his best lieutenants. As you probably know, this wouldn't last, because he and fellow Mournival member Tarek Torgadon, whom he was very close to, were marked for death and sent down to Istvan III to be culled with the other loyalist elements of the Legion. Torgadon, for his part, would die, but Loken would survive, although mentally broken, found wandering the ruins of Istvan III, believing himself to be the last loyal space marine in existence, and renaming himself Cerberus, because he had forgotten his past and believed he was guarding the gates to hell, which honestly, if you woke up on the ruins of Istvan III, yeah, would probably track for someone with no memory of what happened before. Eventually, though, he would be brought in by Malcador's Chosen and more or less rehabilitated, but never fully join on with the organization, refusing to become one of Malcador's knights errant and instead doing his own thing as the last Luna Wolf, eschewing the name Son of Horus for obvious reasons. He would, though, for Malcador, along with another surviving Luna Wolf named Iacton Cruz, confront Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit in a failed assassination attempt, thereby finally severing his ties of loyalties after seeing what his gene father had finally become. It was a really, long time coming confrontation between the two. Loken would then go on to be active during the Siege of Terra, defending the Imperial Palace, even gaining a measure of vengeance in killing his former brother, Horus Axamand, the one who killed his beloved friend Tarek Torgadon. And I say all this to make it clear, the confrontation between Garviel Loken and his former compatriots in the Sons of Horus has been a long-running theme throughout the entire heresy. Garviel Loken is one of the most beloved characters throughout the entire series, and was our POV character from the very beginning of the books. Most of Horus Rising and False Gods were told through his eyes. And it is in those books we get the evidence for him being the one to confront Horus at the final battle, because he, ironically, it's either in the first or second book, muses to himself that one day he is destined to die in combat, unlike the mortals he has come to befriend, like Mercedes Olaton and Kirill Sinderman. And he wonders what would be the ideal death, and he thinks, oh, it would be some epic last stand where I'm fighting alongside the Emperor to protect him. Oh, and Horus would be there, of course, it wouldn't be the same without Horus. It's like this irony that's been set up since the very, first book, and the very opening of the heresy, all those years ago. So it would just be really poetic for them to bring that full circle, and it would be the perfect conclusion to Loken's narrative arc of suffering and then losing his mind, regaining his sanity, confronting his brothers and his father over and over, and finally, in a twist of fate, having that confrontation to fulfill his ideal death. While it would be sad to see Garviel Loken die because we all love him so much, it would be kind of perfect, and it does seem like what Black Library is setting up. Because throughout the End in the Death Volume 1, Loken is sort of being teleported around. Whenever he goes through a door, it just takes him somewhere else he needs to be. He's kind of just jumping through time and space involuntarily. And he meets up with Kirill Sinderman, someone who has been his friend since the very first book. As cliche as that sounds, they do get to finally meet up again after all they've been through and how much both of them have changed, effectively getting the chance to say goodbye to his oldest friend, because right after this, he steps through a door, sees where he is, then immediately locks it behind him so Kirill Sinderman can't follow, because he realizes he has been teleported towards the loading decks of the Vengeful Spirit. He's aboard the ship. That's the very last line in the End in the Death Volume 1. He was aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Yeah, if that's not a setup, I don't know what is. But there is one thing sort of against that. That being what Garviel Loken might say. Because the very first line of the very first book of the heresy is from Garviel Loken saying, "I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor." Now this in-universe is actually a tongue-in-cheek joke, because they landed on a planet that had its own emperor who believed the planet they were on was the original Terra. And when conflict inevitably rose because of this, Horus would end up killing the emperor with his own hands. So it became a joke among the Lunar Wolves in that sort of dark humor they're known for. Oh, Horus killed the emperor, woo. So a lot of people suspect the very last line of the End in the Death Volume 2 will be probably from Loken saying, "I was there the day the emperor slew Horus," or something else that's poetic to that effect. Yeah, he can't really say that if he's cut down by Horus, so it really could go either way, and honestly I'm not sure which one I would prefer, to be honest. So for both Loken and Persson, there are reasons as to why it could be them and why it might not be. Persson himself is stuck in the throne room, but he does have the name and that old vision. Loken does have the possibility of delivering that last line that would be a callback to the very first line, but also has that whole thing of the ideal death and the fact that he is in the right place at the right time, seemingly brought there by destiny. To my and many others' minds, it's going to be one of these two. Either Ollanius Persson or Garviel Loken, who makes that sacrifice for the Emperor in the final confrontation. But the question is, how do people know about this? If it happens aboard the Vengeful Spirit, with no one around to really see it, then how does it become such an ingrained part of the Imperial mythos, to the point where Ollanius Pius is a saint with an award named after him? The answer to that question comes from a controversial section of the book Saturnine from the Siege of Terra series. Now, this part was controversial because many people viewed it as a retconning of the Ollanius Pius story, and I was one of those people, but I've come around on it and come to regard it as a pretty ingenious bit of storytelling on Dan Abnett's part. And I say this with no small amount of criticism for the book Saturnine, even though I did thoroughly enjoy it. You see, in the book Saturnine, we follow a young interrogator, the successor to the Remembrancer Order, whose job it is to talk to soldiers on the ground and see the battle as it happens to record it for future generations. This interrogator, Harry Har, ends up with a group of soldiers headed towards the Eternity Wall spaceport, which, unbeknownst to them, is being sacrificed by Rogel Dorn in order to reinforce other sections and will be allowed to fall. There, he meets a soldier by the name of Olly Piers, Olly being short for Ollanius. Now, he actually hates that name and demands to be called Olympos Piers, but that is still his name. He explains to Harry Har that soldiers lie. He tells them soldiers will spread false stories and exaggerate things deliberately because it makes it easier to bear the horrors and stresses of combat. That's also why he wants to spread the Lectitio Divinitatus, because even though he doesn't really believe in the Emperor's divinity that much, well, I think he comes to believe in it by the time he dies, he thinks it's an important tool to motivate people and help them bear the horror. It's a really interesting thing and a microcosm of how the Lectitio Divinitatus spreads like wildfire during the siege amongst the troops. Now, there is a moment wherein Olly, Harry, and a few other surviving soldiers are holding up a banner of the Emperor as a World Eater charges at them. And he says, everyone hold up the banner, he will protect us, the Emperor will protect us if we don't let the banner fall. And, lo and behold, the World Eater just randomly dies. That's because, unbeknownst to them, he's killed by a Sister of Silence that none of them can really see properly. Well, Olly can see him because he can see the Sisters of Silence for some reason, though it's never specified why, and he mistakes her for a goddess. Don't worry about it. But when Harry goes to record it, Olly says, hey, don't just tell them it was me holding up the banner, tell them I was protecting the Emperor himself. And don't say it was just some random World Eater, say it was Angron. No, say it was Horus. And that's where the legend starts. Because Harry stops, thinks, and then records something that we don't see, but we can assume to be what Olly told him to write down, because he's come around on the necessity of lying as a soldier to motivate people and to help people cope with things. And you could realistically see how, after the siege, when all the traitor legions just fled away, seemingly like some kind of miracle, with nobody knowing what happened in the throne room between the Emperor and Horus, other than the truth that there was some kind of confrontation between the two. Horus is dead, and now the Emperor is interred on the Golden Throne. It would make sense for people to grasp at anything that helps them fill in the gaps. This, to my mind, is a really interesting narrative choice, and one that I actually do approve of. I think it's cool. I think it does make sense. And I know Saturnine, the book, gets a fair amount of criticism for some of the weird lore decisions it took, but honestly, I don't mind this one, especially given the incredibly satisfying and emotional conclusion to it, wherein we meet up with Ollanius Piers one more time as he stands alone on the battlements with that same tattered banner of the Emperor. He and Harry had actually split up to try and find more people to help them in a last stand, hopefully to reinforce their position, but Harry would seemingly die off screen, quote unquote, leaving Olly to stand with the banner alone, which is when Angron himself would face him, and Olly would stand defiant, calling him out, saying, "Come on, see what happens," taunting him, believing the Emperor and Mithras, the warrior goddess he mistook the Sister of Silence to be, would save him if he stood firm and protected the banner. And before attacking and killing him, Angron would yell to the heavens so loudly that the ground would shake, causing the banner to flutter from the pole and fall to the ground. Incredible scene, and honestly, the entire fall of the Eternity Wall spaceport was one of the best moments of the Siege of Terra, and one of my favorite moments in the entire heresy just in general. Ties up all the storylines in the book, it's very well written, pulse-pounding, very emotional. I'm getting a little off track here, but it's just a great scene. Now, before we wrap up this video, I want to touch on two more characters who have tangential relations to this role in the minds of the fandom, but not so much in canon. One of them being Katsuhiro. Now, Katsuhiro was a conscripted guardsman from Terra's civilian population, and was the POV character for the book The Lost and the Damned, a really good one. And we have watched him throughout the entire Siege of Terra, bit by bit, as he goes through the motions of becoming a terrified conscript, to basically accepting, oh my god, I'm gonna die, I'm screwed, to becoming a true veteran, and eventually a leader amongst people as he gets command by dint of the fact that he's basically the only person alive with any experience in an area, and eventually goes on to find faith. He clings to the faith in the God Emperor very tightly as things go on to help him going forward and to keep him alive and motivated just a little more and keep him fighting. And he spreads this and promotes this amongst his fellow soldiers and conscripts. And going on to join up with Euphrates Keeler as one of her conclave, doing what they can to fight as they are basically left almost to die effectively. He does also have a child with him, given to him by the White Scar Shiban Khan, whom he had met up with earlier in the book Warhawk. We have followed him since nearly the beginning of the Siege of Terra. He has been the ultimate civilian POV and has appeared in almost every book. He is the epitome of the soldier who has slogged through this. We've seen him go through so much, and a lot of us really do hope to see a good, satisfying conclusion to his narrative arc. He really does seem to have been through enough and alive through enough that we will get something, as opposed to him like dying off screen or him just dying ignobly in some assault. There probably will be something there. And for a little while, people did think it might be him. He could be the one who ends up aboard the Vengeful Spirit in that final hour and sacrifices himself for the Emperor who he now has faith in. But this theory has sort of fallen out of vogue, especially with regard to the new Loken developments we have, and the arrival of Ollanius Persson and his followers in Mortis. So it really does seem like it's not going to be him, also considering where he and Euphrates Keeler are going with their story and where they're currently located in the narrative. But there is a theory as to who he will end up being, and some people have theorized he will end up being Grammaticus, who was a veteran guardsman and a veteran of the Siege of Terra who gathered a large following of the faithful and would be instrumental in the creation of the Temple of the Savior Emperor, the faith that would preclude the Adeptus Ministorum. This is actually a really old piece of lore from the Adeptus Sororitas Codex 2nd edition, all the way back in 1997, and we've heard basically nothing of it since then. So I think it would be cool to bring something that old back to the fore, and it would be an awesome way to honor Katsuhiro and the journey he has gone on that we have followed him through. The other person people thought might become Ollanius Pius was John Grammaticus. Now, despite what some people might think, I do know for a fact that yes, John Grammaticus was in other books than just Legion. I made a joke in my Omegon video that John Grammaticus appeared in the book Legion and never ever again. Now, that was just a joke about how much I hate him and wish he actually had never appeared again after that book. But some people didn't really get the joke. Well, a lot of people actually didn't get the joke, and that comment section is full of people saying, hey, just so you know, John Grammaticus appeared in Vulcan Lives, or in Unremembered Empire, and throughout the Siege of Terra. What are you talking about? I know, guys, don't worry. Now, the reason some people were, I shouldn't say thought he would be Ollanius Pius, but were worried he would be Ollanius Pius, because I'm happy I've become a rallying point for everybody who hates him, is because of the uncanny and unpleasant ability of his to just appear wherever he needs to be without very much explanation and through some bullshit plot device. And also because on a narrative perspective, I'm loath to admit it, it actually would be an excellent cap-off for his narrative arc. He started off as effectively selling humanity out to the Cabal, an alien entity, and then going through a long period of guilt and attempts at redemption, aided by people like Eldrad Ulthran and Ollanius Persson, to prove he is not a traitor, he is a good man, and him being there for humanity at the 11th hour would be a great way to cap off that entire narrative arc. And honestly, it might actually be even a little more satisfying than Ollanius Persson, because we followed John more than him. And if I can admit that, you know it must mean something. There's nothing to really prove this theory, but also nothing to seemingly disprove it, to be honest. I think a lot of us are just hoping it doesn't happen, but ready for something that disappointing to happen at the 11th hour. Again though, fingers crossed it's not going to be him. It will likely either be Garviel Loken or Ollanius Persson. But what do you guys think? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about who you guys think will be the one to make that sacrifice for the Emperor in the end, or if it will even happen at all, and Dan Abnett will just throw us some big curveball. What do you guys think of characters like Katsuhiro and John Grammaticus, or even Olly Piers, who died in Saturnine? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on the matter, and until then, I will see you in the next video.